Stay out of my life. 3 weeks later, the same woman stood on Ethan Walker's front porch at 2:17 in the morning, soaked by cold October rain and crying so hard she could barely catch her breath. Sometimes the strongest walls are built by people who are secretly falling apart. The rain hammered against the roof of Ethan's small farmhouse just outside Cedar Ridge, Ohio. Wind rattled the maple trees lining the gravel driveway. The world fell asleep, wrapped in darkness and silence, until a frantic knock shattered the night. Ethan stirred awake instantly. Years of raising a daughter alone had trained him to wake at the slightest sound. Another knock followed, then another. He glanced at the clock glowing beside his bed. 2:17 a.m. Nobody visited at that hour unless something was wrong. Pulling on a gray sweatshirt, he quietly stepped into the hallway. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. His 8-year-old daughter Lily remained asleep down the hall, surrounded by stuffed animals and storybooks. Ethan moved carefully, not wanting to wake her. The knocking came again. Faster now, more desperate. He reached the front door and looked through the small glass panel. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. Then his heart stopped. Victoria Sterling stood beneath the porch light. Her dark coat was drenched. Rainwater dripped from her hair. Her shoulders trembled as she hugged herself against the cold. Ethan froze. 3 weeks earlier, she had looked him directly in the eyes and told him to stay out of her life. 3 weeks earlier, she had humiliated him in front of hundreds of people. 3 weeks earlier, she had made it painfully clear that whatever connection they had built meant nothing. Yet here she was, alone, broken, crying. Ethan opened the door. Neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence between them. Victoria lowered her eyes. For the first time since he had met her, she looked small. Not like the billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms. Not like the woman whose face appeared on magazine covers. Not like the executive feared by competitors across the country. Just a tired woman carrying something too heavy to bear alone. Victoria? Ethan finally said softly. She opened her mouth. No words came out. Her voice seemed trapped somewhere behind the tears. She looked away and wiped her face, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. Ethan noticed the slight shaking in her hands. He noticed the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Most of all, he noticed something he had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. The kind that money couldn't fix. The kind that success couldn't silence. For several long seconds, neither moved. The porch light cast a warm glow against the storm. Rainwater streamed off the roof in silver sheets. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across the Ohio countryside. Victoria swallowed hard. She began, then stopped. Her composure crumbled again. Ethan didn't ask questions. He didn't remind her what she had said weeks ago. He didn't demand explanations. Character is often revealed not when people deserve kindness, but when they least expect it. Ethan simply stepped aside and held the door open. Victoria looked at him in disbelief. "Come inside," he said quietly. Another tear rolled down her cheek. She hesitated. Then she stepped across the threshold. Neither of them realized that upstairs, Lily had awakened after hearing the knocking. Standing silently at the top of the staircase, she peeked through the railing. Her sleepy eyes widened. Because the woman standing in their living room was the same woman she had missed every single day for the past 3 weeks. And for the first time, Lily understood something was terribly wrong. As thunder echoed outside and the front door slowly closed behind them, none of them knew that this rainy night would change every part of their lives forever. Victoria sat at the edge of Ethan's worn leather couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea she had barely touched. The fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace, filling the farmhouse with a warmth that felt strangely unfamiliar to her. For years, warmth had come from heated penthouses, luxury resorts, and private jets. Yet none of those places had ever felt like home. Ethan placed a folded blanket beside her. "You should try to get warm," he said quietly. She nodded but could not bring herself to speak. Upstairs, Lily remained hidden behind the staircase railing, watching with worried eyes before finally returning to her room. Ethan sat in the armchair across from Victoria. He did not pressure her. He did not fill the silence with questions. Outside, the storm continued to sweep across the countryside. Inside, another storm lingered between them, one that had begun months earlier when their paths first crossed. Back then, nobody would have believed that Victoria Sterling and Ethan Walker could even occupy the same world. Victoria was one of the most recognized business leaders in America. Her technology company employed thousands of people and generated billions in annual revenue. Financial magazines called her brilliant. Television interviews called her unstoppable. Employees called her demanding. Investors called her a genius. Yet behind every title stood a woman who trusted almost no one. Ethan, meanwhile, lived a life most people would overlook. He owned a small woodworking business outside Cedar Ridge. His days were filled with sawdust, customer orders, school pickups, and soccer practices. His world revolved around Lily. Every decision he made began and ended with one question: what is best for my daughter? Their first meeting happened on a bright Saturday morning in early spring. Victoria's company had funded a new community center for local families. Ethan had been hired to build custom benches, bookshelves, and reading tables for the project. He remembered seeing black SUVs pull into the parking lot. He remembered people suddenly standing straighter. He remembered hearing whispers. "The CEO is here." Victoria stepped out wearing a navy blazer and carrying a tablet. Executives followed behind her, eager to impress. Ethan barely looked up from his workbench. He simply continued sanding a piece of oak. One executive frowned. Another looked offended. Most people rushed to greet Victoria Sterling. Ethan did not. Several minutes later, Victoria found herself standing beside his workstation. "Those look impressive," she said. Ethan glanced up briefly. "Thank you." She waited for more. Nothing came. "You know who I am?" she asked. Ethan smiled slightly. "I assume you are the person writing the checks." For the first time that day, Victoria laughed. A genuine laugh. Not the polite version she used during interviews. Not the controlled version she used at corporate events. A real laugh. "That is one way to describe me." "Then thank you," Ethan replied. "This center will help a lot of families." That simple conversation should have ended there. Yet something unexpected happened. Victoria returned the following week. Then again the week after that. Officially, she was checking construction progress. Unofficially, she found herself looking forward to conversations with a man who never seemed impressed by her title. Ethan treated her exactly the same way he treated everyone else. With respect. With honesty. With quiet dignity. One afternoon, Lily arrived after school carrying a backpack almost as large as she was. She spotted Victoria immediately. "You are the fancy business lady," Lily announced. Victoria blinked in surprise. Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. "Lily." "What?" Lily asked innocently. Victoria laughed again. "I suppose I am." From that moment forward, something began changing. Not just in Lily. Not just in Ethan. But in Victoria herself. And although none of them realized it then, the happiest days of their story had already begun, quietly unfolding before the heartbreak that would eventually bring a billionaire CEO to a farmhouse door in the middle of a storm. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm none of them expected. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Victoria found reasons to visit the community center. Sometimes she reviewed project reports. Sometimes she inspected budgets. Sometimes she simply appeared without warning and lingered longer than necessary. Ethan noticed it. So did everyone else. Yet neither of them said a word about it. The spring air gradually warmed across Cedar Ridge. Green returned to the fields. Children filled the baseball diamonds. Families gathered in parks again after the long Ohio winter. Somewhere between meetings and construction updates, Victoria discovered something she had not experienced in years. Peace. One Saturday morning she arrived at the center carrying a box of pastries from a bakery nearly 40 miles away. "You drove all that way for donuts?" Ethan asked. Victoria placed the box on a work table. "They are not donuts." "Then what are they?" "Artisan pastries." Ethan opened the lid and stared for a moment. "These are expensive donuts." Victoria rolled her eyes. Ethan laughed. The sound echoed through the nearly finished building. To her surprise, Victoria found herself laughing too. Nearby, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor coloring pictures. She looked up and grinned. "You laugh more now." Victoria blinked. "What do you mean?" "The first time I met you, you looked like somebody who forgot where they put their smile." Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. Victoria stared at Lily before slowly shaking her head. "You know, most people are afraid to talk to me that way." "Why?" Lily asked. "Because you are rich." Ethan covered his face with one hand. Victoria laughed so hard she had to sit down. The little girl had no idea how unusual that moment was. For years, Victoria had attended luxury galas, corporate retreats, and executive conferences. Thousands of conversations. Thousands of handshakes. Yet very few people spoke to her honestly. Most wanted something. Access. Opportunity. Influence. Approval. Lily wanted none of those things. She simply liked her. Over time, Victoria began joining them outside of work. She attended one of Lily's soccer games. She sat on a folding chair beside Ethan while parents cheered from the sidelines. The afternoon sun hung low above the field. Children ran in every direction with varying levels of athletic skill. At one point, Lily accidentally kicked the ball the wrong way and helped the opposing team score. Several parents groaned. Lily looked devastated. Victoria immediately stood and started clapping. "That is my favorite goal of the game," she announced. Ethan stared at her. "You cannot be serious." "Absolutely serious." Lily burst out laughing. The embarrassment vanished. Sometimes kindness arrives through grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives through one person refusing to let a child feel ashamed. As weeks passed, Victoria became a familiar presence in their lives. She joined them for ice cream downtown. She attended a school fundraiser. She even helped Lily build a birdhouse despite having absolutely no experience with tools. The birdhouse leaned slightly to one side. The paint was uneven. One section was attached backwards. Lily proudly called it perfect. Ethan kept it anyway. One evening after a community event, the three of them sat on a wooden bench overlooking Cedar Ridge Lake. The water reflected the orange and gold colors of sunset. Gentle waves brushed against the shoreline. Lily rested her head against Victoria's shoulder. The little girl had fallen asleep during the drive. Victoria carefully adjusted the blanket around her. For several minutes, neither adult spoke. Ethan finally glanced toward her. "You are good with her." Victoria looked down at Lily. A faint smile touched her face. "She makes it easy." Ethan nodded. "She likes you." Victoria's expression softened further. "I like her too." The silence that followed felt comfortable. Natural. The kind of silence that exists only when people stop trying to impress each other. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Victoria experienced something unexpected. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering what life might look like if success was not the center of everything. If board meetings were not the most important part of her week. If there was room for something more. Something quieter. Something real. She did not realize it then, but Lily had already noticed the change long before either adult understood it. Because every time Victoria arrived, her eyes searched for Ethan first. And every time Ethan smiled, Victoria smiled back. By early summer, the community center was finished, and life should have felt perfect. From the outside, it certainly looked that way. Victoria's company received praise for the project. Local newspapers published photographs of smiling families. The grand opening drew crowds from across the county. Ethan stood beside Lily near the ribbon ceremony while Victoria delivered a brief speech. Everyone saw success. Almost nobody saw the cracks forming beneath it. The first sign appeared on a Thursday evening when Victoria's phone rang for the third time during dinner. They were sitting at a small diner on Main Street. Lily was explaining the complicated social hierarchy of her fourth-grade classroom. Ethan listened with complete seriousness. Victoria tried to do the same. Then her screen lit up again. The name on the display caused her smile to disappear instantly. Ethan noticed it. "Everything okay?" he asked. Victoria locked the phone without answering. "Just work." Ethan nodded. He did not push further. Respect often means allowing people to keep the doors they are not ready to open. Yet the phone continued ringing throughout the meal. Later that night, after dropping Lily home, Ethan watched Victoria sit alone in her car for nearly 10 minutes before driving away. Something about the image stayed with him. The following weeks brought more signs. Victoria arrived late to events she never would have missed before. She seemed distracted during conversations. Sometimes she stared into space while Lily talked excitedly about school. Her smile still appeared, but it arrived a second too late. Her laughter sounded genuine, yet carried a trace of exhaustion underneath. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting alone on a bench behind the community center. The July sun cast long shadows across the grass. Children played nearby. Birds drifted between trees. Victoria looked completely detached from all of it. "You are thinking too hard again," Ethan said as he approached. She glanced up. "How can you tell?" "You get this look." "What look?" "Like somebody trying to solve a problem nobody else can see." For a moment, Victoria almost smiled. Then her expression faded again. "Maybe I am." Ethan sat beside her. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence felt heavy this time. Different. Finally he asked, "Do you ever get tired?" Victoria laughed softly. "Every day." "Then maybe stop carrying everything by yourself." The words landed harder than he intended. Victoria looked away toward the playground. Children raced across the grass without a care in the world. For a brief second, her eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to sadness. "You make it sound easy," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "No, I just know it is impossible to carry the world forever." What he did not know was that Victoria's world had already begun shifting beneath her feet. Inside Sterling Technologies, board members were questioning recent decisions. Major investors demanded aggressive expansion plans she believed were reckless. Quarterly earnings remained strong, but pressure continued growing. Worse still, someone she once trusted had quietly begun positioning themselves against her. A man named Richard Langford. Years earlier, he had been more than a colleague. He had been the closest person in her life. The betrayal that followed had taught her a painful lesson. Trust carefully. Depend on no one. Never allow anyone close enough to hurt you again. Those lessons helped build a billion-dollar company. They also built walls. Strong walls. Lonely walls. One evening, Victoria stood alone inside her penthouse overlooking downtown Columbus. The city lights stretched endlessly below. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another problem. Another demand. Yet her attention drifted toward a photograph sitting on the kitchen counter. It showed Ethan, Lily, and herself holding the crooked birdhouse they had built together. Victoria stared at the picture longer than she intended. Then she quickly looked away. Because for the first time in years, something frightened her more than losing a business deal. She was beginning to care about people she could not control. And deep down, she knew that caring always came with risk. August arrived with clear skies, county fairs, and the kind of golden evenings that made Cedar Ridge feel untouched by the rest of the world. For a few weeks, Victoria almost convinced herself that balance was possible. She attended meetings during the day and spent time with Ethan and Lily whenever she could. Yet the pressure waiting beyond town limits continued growing. One Friday afternoon, a black luxury sedan pulled into the parking lot outside Sterling Technologies headquarters. Victoria stepped out and immediately noticed something unusual. Conversation stopped when she walked past. Employees smiled, but the smiles looked forced. Executives avoided eye contact. The atmosphere felt wrong. Inside the boardroom, the reason became clear. Richard Langford sat at the far end of the polished conference table. He wore the same confident smile she remembered from years ago. The smile that once felt reassuring now felt dangerous. "Victoria," he said warmly. "It has been too long." She remained standing. Not long enough. Several board members exchanged nervous glances. Richard simply chuckled. Still direct. "I always admired that." The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end, Victoria understood exactly what was happening. Richard had quietly built alliances inside the company. Investors trusted him. Board members listened to him. Rumors about her leadership had begun spreading through executive circles. Nothing overt. Nothing dramatic. Just enough doubt to weaken confidence. As she left the building that evening, her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from attorneys, investors, and advisors. Every notification felt heavier than the last. Meanwhile, Ethan was helping Lily practice multiplication tables at the kitchen table. The smell of homemade chili filled the farmhouse. Crickets chirped outside the open windows. Life moved at a different speed there. A healthier speed. Around 7 o'clock, Ethan's phone lit up with Victoria's name. He answered immediately. "Hey." Silence greeted him. Then a long exhale. "Rough day?" he asked. Another pause. "You could say that." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Okay." Victoria smiled despite herself. Most people would have pushed. Most people would have demanded details. Ethan never did. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not trying to fix everything." Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was now drawing hearts around incorrect math answers. Maybe because some things are not meant to be fixed. Sometimes people just need someone willing to sit beside them while they figure things out. The words lingered with Victoria long after the call ended. Unfortunately, not everyone shared Ethan's perspective. The following week, a charity gala brought together business leaders, politicians, and media personalities from across Ohio. Victoria almost skipped the event entirely. Her public relations team insisted she attend. Investors would be there. Reporters would be there. The board would be watching. So she went. Ethan attended too after receiving an invitation from the community center committee. He wore a simple navy suit he had owned for years. Lily remained with a neighbor for the evening. When Ethan entered the ballroom, chandeliers cast warm light across polished marble floors. Hundreds of guests mingled beneath soaring ceilings. He immediately felt out of place. Victoria noticed him almost instantly. For the first time all evening, she genuinely smiled. She started walking toward him. Then she heard her name. Richard appeared beside her. "Interesting choice," he said casually. Victoria frowned. "What are you talking about?" Richard glanced toward Ethan across the room. "The single father from Cedar Ridge." Victoria's expression hardened. "Leave him out of this." Richard lowered his voice. "People are talking. Investors are curious. They think he is getting very close to the most powerful woman in the company." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. "That is none of their business." "Maybe, but perception matters." Richard smiled. "You know that better than anyone." Across the ballroom, Ethan remained unaware of the conversation. He was speaking with a local council member when he noticed Victoria looking toward him. Their eyes met briefly. Under normal circumstances, she would have walked over. Tonight she did not. And deep inside, old fears she thought she had buried forever were beginning to wake up. The gala ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, while a string quartet played softly near the stage. Conversations flowed. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. To everyone else, it looked like another successful evening among powerful people. To Victoria, it felt like standing in the center of a tightening storm. Richard's words continued echoing inside her mind. Perception matters. Investors are watching. People are talking. For years she had built her career by staying ahead of every threat. She anticipated risks before they appeared. She controlled narratives before they spread. She trusted discipline over emotion. Yet tonight, for the first time in months, emotion was winning. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood comfortably speaking with local leaders and community volunteers. He looked exactly the same as he always did. Calm, grounded, unimpressed by status. Several people approached him throughout the evening simply because they enjoyed being around him. Victoria noticed every interaction. Somehow that made everything worse. Richard stepped beside her again. "You should be careful." Victoria kept her eyes forward. "Enough, Richard. I am trying to help you." "No, you are trying to manipulate me." He smiled faintly. "Then answer one question. If tomorrow every financial publication in the country ran stories connecting your personal life to company leadership, what happens to shareholder confidence?" Victoria said nothing. Richard knew he had found the exact pressure point. "You built an empire because you stay objective," he continued quietly. "Do not throw that away now." Then he walked off. Victoria remained frozen. The music continued. The crowd continued smiling. Yet her chest felt tight. Fear has a strange way of disguising itself as logic. It convinces people they are making smart decisions when they are really protecting old wounds. A few minutes later, Ethan finally made his way toward her. His expression softened when he reached her side. "You look exhausted." Victoria forced a smile. "Long week. Then maybe leave early." "I cannot." "You always say that." Ethan's voice carried gentle concern. Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet in that moment Victoria suddenly saw everything Richard wanted her to see. Headlines. Rumors. Questions. Doubt. Investors. Board members. The possibility of losing control. Old memories surfaced. Broken trust. Betrayal. Disappointment. Every wall she had spent years building rushed back into place at once. Ethan noticed the change immediately. "Victoria?" She stepped back. "I think this was a mistake." Ethan frowned. What was all of this? The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade around them. "I do not understand," he said quietly. Victoria swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to stop talking. Every fear told her to keep going. Fear won. "You need to stop." Ethan stared at her. "Stop what?" "This." She gestured vaguely between them. The calls. The dinners. The expectations. Confusion crossed Ethan's face. "Victoria, there are no expectations. Maybe not for you." Her voice became colder, more controlled. The version of herself she used in boardrooms had returned. "But I cannot do this." Ethan remained silent. She hated that silence. It made her hear her own words more clearly. "I have responsibilities," she continued. "I have a company depending on me. I cannot afford distractions. The moment the word left her mouth, she regretted it. Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger, not resentment, just hurt. Quiet hurt. The kind decent people rarely show. Distractions, he repeated softly. Victoria looked away. She could not hold his gaze anymore. I think it is best if we keep our lives separate. Ethan nodded slowly. Several seconds passed. The orchestra continued playing. Nearby guests laughed without realizing anything had happened. Finally, Ethan spoke. If that is what you want. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Yet she forced herself to continue. It is. Another long silence followed. Then Ethan gave a single nod. Okay. No argument. No accusations. No attempt to change her mind. Just dignity. Just respect. Somehow that hurt even more. Ethan turned and walked away. Victoria watched him disappear into the crowd. For one brief second, she wanted to call him back. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to explain everything she could not seem to say. Instead, she stood perfectly still. Because pride often sounds louder than wisdom in moments that matter most. Later that night, Ethan drove home beneath a sky full of stars. He said very little. When Lily asked how the gala went, he simply smiled and told her it was fine. The next morning, he did not call Victoria. The day after that, he did not text. The day after that, nothing. And for the first time since she met him, Victoria discovered that silence could be far more painful than any argument. September arrived carrying colder mornings and longer shadows. The silence that followed the gala stretched far beyond what either of them expected. Ethan kept his promise. He respected the boundary Victoria had drawn. No messages, no phone calls, no unexpected visits. He simply disappeared from her daily life with the same quiet dignity he had always shown. At first, Victoria convinced herself it was the right decision. She buried herself in work. Board meetings filled her calendar. Investor calls consumed her evenings. Strategy sessions occupied her weekends. Yet every time her phone remained silent, she felt something missing. The absence became impossible to ignore. Then the real problems began. 3 weeks after the gala, Sterling Technologies faced its first major setback in years. A planned acquisition collapsed unexpectedly. Financial analysts questioned leadership decisions. News outlets published articles speculating about instability inside the company. None of it was catastrophic. Not yet. But the confidence she had spent years building started to crack. The pressure inside headquarters became relentless. Executives whispered behind closed doors. Board members requested emergency meetings. Investors demanded answers. Through it all, Richard Langford remained calm. Too calm. One Monday morning, Victoria entered a board meeting and immediately sensed the shift. Conversations stopped when she walked in. Several directors avoided eye contact. Others offered rehearsed smiles. She sat down slowly. Richard folded his hands. We need to discuss leadership concerns. The words landed like ice. For the next 90 minutes, Victoria listened as people she had trusted questioned her judgment. Some concerns were reasonable. Others felt carefully orchestrated. By the time the meeting ended, she understood the truth. Richard was not merely challenging her decisions. He was positioning himself to replace her. That evening, Victoria sat alone in her office overlooking downtown Columbus. The city lights blurred beyond the glass. Her desk remained covered in reports, projections, and legal documents. Yet her attention drifted elsewhere. To a farmhouse outside Cedar Ridge. To a little girl who once called her the fancy business lady. To a man who never asked for anything except honesty. Her phone sat inches away. One message. That was all it would take. Yet pride kept her hand still. Meanwhile, Ethan's life continued moving forward. He focused on work. He attended Lily's soccer games. He volunteered at the community center. Outwardly, everything looked normal. Yet Lily noticed the difference immediately. One evening while they washed dishes together, she asked the question Ethan had been quietly avoiding. Did Miss Victoria do something wrong? Ethan paused. Water ran across the sink. The smell of apple pie drifted from the kitchen counter. No, he answered gently. Then why does she not come around anymore? Ethan searched for the right words. Sometimes adults make decisions they think are best. Lily frowned. That sounds like a fancy way of saying somebody got hurt. Ethan looked at his daughter and almost laughed. The observation was painfully accurate. Back in Columbus, the situation worsened. Victoria's mother, Eleanor Sterling, was admitted to a hospital following a serious health scare. The prognosis was hopeful, but the experience shook Victoria deeply. For the first time in years, she found herself sitting beside a hospital bed feeling completely powerless. Success could not solve everything. Money could not fix every problem. Titles could not protect the people she loved. During one particularly difficult night, she sat alone in the hospital cafeteria staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with business updates. She ignored every notification. For the first time, none of it seemed important. Around midnight, she opened her photo gallery. Hundreds of corporate images appeared. Conferences, award ceremonies, magazine covers. Then she found the picture of the crooked birdhouse. Ethan smiling, Lily laughing. The three of them standing together beneath a bright summer sky. Victoria stared at the photograph until tears filled her eyes. Because in that moment she finally understood something devastating. When everything else began falling apart, the person she wanted to call was the one she had pushed away herself. The rain began just after sunset. By 10 o'clock, sheets of water swept across the interstate connecting Columbus to Cedar Ridge. Headlights reflected against wet pavement. Wind rattled road signs. Most drivers slowed down or pulled into rest stops to wait out the storm. Victoria Sterling kept driving. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile. The hospital bracelet still rested in her coat pocket. Her mother's exhausted smile remained burned into her memory. The board meeting from earlier that afternoon replayed endlessly in her thoughts. Richard's calm confidence. The directors questioning her leadership. The growing realization that everything she spent years building could disappear. Yet none of those things were what finally pushed her onto the highway that night. It was a photograph. A simple photograph of a crooked birdhouse and three people smiling beneath a summer sky. Around 11:30, she stopped at a gas station outside Dayton. Rain pounded the roof overhead. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above empty fuel pumps. Victoria stepped inside and bought a cup of coffee she never drank. She sat alone near the window staring into the darkness. Her phone rested on the table beside her. Hundreds of unread messages waited for attention. Attorneys, investors, executives, public relations teams. She ignored every one of them. For the first time in years, the most important conversation in her life was not happening in a boardroom. It was one she had been avoiding for weeks. She remembered the way Ethan had looked at her during the gala. Not angry, not defensive, just disappointed. The memory hurt more than any criticism she had received from investors. Because Ethan had offered her something nobody else ever had. Honest friendship, trust without conditions, respect without expectations. And she had thrown it away out of fear. Fear disguised as responsibility. Fear disguised as professionalism. Fear disguised as logic. The truth was much simpler. She had cared more than she wanted to admit, and that terrified her. Shortly after midnight, Victoria returned to the road. The storm intensified. Thunder rolled across the Ohio countryside. Windshield wipers struggled to keep pace with the rain. Mile after mile passed beneath her tires. Cornfields stretched endlessly beyond the darkness. Small towns appeared and vanished. Yet she never considered turning around. Somewhere after 1 o'clock, she finally allowed herself to say the words aloud. I was wrong. The confession disappeared into the empty car. But somehow speaking it made the silence easier to bear. In Cedar Ridge, Ethan finished locking the workshop behind his farmhouse. A custom dining table sat completed near the back wall. The scent of fresh-cut oak lingered in the air. He glanced toward the dark horizon where distant lightning illuminated clouds above the fields. Something felt unsettled tonight. Not dangerous, just different. Inside the house, Lily had already fallen asleep with a book resting on her chest. Ethan carefully removed it and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. Then he turned off the bedside lamp and headed downstairs. By 2 o'clock, the storm had fully arrived. Rain hammered the roof. Tree branches swayed in the wind. The farmhouse settled into its familiar nighttime quiet. Then headlights appeared at the end of the gravel driveway. A dark vehicle slowly approached through the rain. Ethan did not see it. Not yet. The engine stopped. The headlights disappeared. For several moments, nobody moved. Victoria sat motionless behind the steering wheel. Her heart pounded harder than it had before any business presentation in her life. She could negotiate billion-dollar agreements without hesitation. Yet walking to a farmhouse door suddenly felt impossible. Finally, she opened the car door. Cold rain soaked her instantly. Wind tugged at her coat. The porch light glowed warmly ahead. Step by step, she crossed the driveway. Memories followed each footstep. Lily laughing beside the soccer field. Ethan building benches at the community center. Summer sunsets by the lake. Every moment, she almost allowed herself to believe in something more. By the time she reached the porch, tears mixed with the rain on her face. She raised her hand toward the door, hesitated, then knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Somewhere inside the house, footsteps began moving toward her. And for the first time in weeks, Victoria was no longer afraid of losing a company. She was afraid that the one person who truly mattered might never forgive her. The front door opened slowly. Warm light spilled across the porch and into the rain. Ethan stood there exactly as Victoria remembered. Gray sweatshirt, tired eyes, quiet presence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm seemed to fade into the background. The only sound was the rain striking the roof above them. Victoria tried to find the right words. None came. Weeks of regret, fear, exhaustion, and loneliness crowded her chest at once. Finally, she lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Her voice broke. I am so sorry. Ethan said nothing. He simply listened. Victoria wiped tears from her face, but more followed. You were the one person who never wanted anything from me. You never asked for favors. You never cared about my money. You never cared about my title. She swallowed hard. And I pushed you away anyway. The silence that followed felt heavy and honest. Not uncomfortable, just real. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Come inside before you catch a cold. Victoria stared at him. Out of everything she expected, kindness was the one thing she felt she deserved least. Yet there it was. Simple, quiet, unconditional. She stepped into the farmhouse. The familiar scent of wood, cinnamon, and coffee greeted her immediately. It felt like walking into a memory. Ethan closed the door behind her. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Victoria finally spoke again. My mother is sick. Ethan nodded gently. I know that must be hard. The board is trying to remove me. Another nod. That must be hard too. Victoria laughed through her tears. You are not going to tell me what to do. No. You are not going to judge me. No. She shook her head in disbelief. Why? Ethan looked at her quietly. Because you already seem to be carrying enough. The words shattered the last piece of armor she had left. Victoria covered her face and cried openly for the first time in years. Not because she was weak, not because she had failed, but because she was finally standing somewhere she did not have to be strong. A soft sound came from the staircase. Both turned. Lily stood halfway down the steps wearing pink pajamas and holding a stuffed rabbit. Her sleepy eyes widened the moment she saw Victoria. For one brief second, nobody moved. Then Lily hurried down the stairs. Miss Victoria? Victoria looked up. Hi, sweetheart. The little girl crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her without hesitation. No questions. No conditions. Just love. Victoria hugged her back and cried even harder. Ethan watched from a few feet away. The room grew quiet. Not empty quiet. Healing quiet. The kind of silence that arrives when people stop pretending. The kind that follows truth. Over the months that followed, life did not magically become perfect. Eleanor Sterling slowly recovered. The board battle ended when several directors discovered Richard's manipulation and chose integrity over politics. Victoria remained chief executive officer, but she changed. She stopped measuring her worth by quarterly reports. She stopped believing that carrying everything alone was strength. More importantly, she stopped running from people who genuinely cared about her. Some weekends, she drove to Cedar Ridge simply to share dinner with Ethan and Lily. Other times they sat by the lake watching sunsets paint the water gold. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy, just ordinary moments. And sometimes, ordinary moments become the greatest miracles of all. 1 year later, the Crooked Birdhouse still stood in Ethan's backyard. It leaned exactly as much as before. The paint remained uneven. Lily insisted it was perfect. Victoria finally agreed. Because perfection was never the point. Love was. Grace was. Second chances were. And as the evening sun settled across the Ohio countryside, 3 people sat together on a porch, listening to the wind move through the trees, grateful for a truth that had taken all of them time to learn. The strongest hearts are not the ones that never break. They are the ones willing to open again after they do. And if this story reminded you that kindness still matters, that dignity still matters, and that second chances can change a life, Share your thoughts below. We would love to hear where you are watching from. And if stories like this stay with your heart, subscribe and join us for another journey of grace, hope, and quiet redemption.